Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast, where the art and science of operational excellence come to life through captivating stories of triumph, challenge, and transformation from the front lines of industry. Our distinguished guests, from manufacturing pioneers and medical device innovators to aerospace visionaries, diagnostic lab leaders, and major capital project leaders, unveil the hidden patterns and powerful insights that drive exceptional results in the complex world of operations. Join us on this journey of discovery as we explore the brilliant minds behind the systems that make our world work and uncover the leadership secrets that could revolutionize your approach to operations forever. Here is your host, Ed Pound.
Welcome, everyone, to the Operations Science Podcast, where we explore how the science of working better transforms industries and careers. The opinions expressed by our guests are their own and are not meant to represent their company's positions unless specifically stated as such. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming a guest with incredible global experience leading supply chain and operations functions across a variety of industries and regions. He's worked with some of the world's largest and most respected companies, including Thermo Fisher Scientific, a global leader in serving science with products that ranges from life-saving diagnostic tools to advanced laboratory equipment such as electron microscopes. From building high-performing teams to driving digital transformations in operations, his leadership has left an impact across continents. He's a proud Michigan State Spartan, an avid tennis player, father and husband, and someone who's mastered the art of blending strategic planning with effective execution. Please welcome to the show, Rahul Teotia. Hey, Rahul, how are you?
I'm good, Ed, and thank you for a generous introduction. Thank you for inviting me over.
Glad to have you. It's well earned. So you've had great experience stepping into leadership roles at major companies around the world. When you step into a new organization, I know a lot of executives face this, especially at a senior level. What are your best practices for forming effective, high-performing teams?
Yeah, so Ed, the first thing is when you join the companies, you got to start listening. And the first couple of months, I think, is all about listening rather than sharing your thoughts, ideas. At that point, it's too early in the game. So you start looking at that, you start forming your opinion, thoughts around what strategy is working, what's not working in the company, what's the culture of the company, how organizationally set up to do things differently. And then you start honing in on, what are the key themes that are the business pain points. Once you have understood those pain points, then the question comes is how are you structured to make that happen? And in that structure, do you have people in the right places and the right skill sets to support those pain points that needs to be addressed?
So you're dealing with, as we mentioned, large international companies. Does this mean getting on a plane and going to visit a lot of people? Do you prefer that or Zoom?
No. I'm still an old school guy when it comes to this. I like to go visit people. I think that the fact that you're visiting them, you're meeting them face to face, you start building that relationship and the trust that's important. So, as I said, the first couple of months or 3 months is intensive travel.
Well, it gets you lots of air miles and status.
Something I don't aspire to do because that takes me away from the family, but it's part of the job.
Yeah, that's right. Air travel is not quite as glamorous as it used to be. When you've done this, I'm just wondering, so you've done this a number of times. Has there been something that surprised you when you've gone to visit in a new role, or is it all pretty much, you've seen it all before?
I have been in many different industries, Ed, and it is very interesting and kind of boring from time to time to say that the problems are the same. It's how you deal with those problems depends on how the company is structured, the culture of the company, and the nuances of industries here and there. But the fundamentals of operations science, supply chain, they still remain the same. The application might be tweaked based on the industry you are in.
Right. Okay. So, so that's you going to visit these people and your new organization, and having done the same sort of thing, and not such a broad role, but you're always wondering in terms of how people perceive you, and there's a balance between just coming in and saying, I'm going to lay the hammer down, and trying to do the other end is servant leadership. How do you balance those two to establish that trust and credibility?
Yeah, I think it's very important, as I said, when you are meeting people, is to listen, they feel heard. That's important. That you're not coming in with some as pre-assumptions in your head and going on with a hammer and saying do this and that. So I think it's very important to appreciate that fact that you listen in and to know that you don't know everything. There are people who are in that company for a long time. They may know things more than you do, so I think that is important, and and make these people part of your decision making. So I'm not the kind of person who goes with a hammer and says do this. I think I'm wise enough from that perspective to know that I don't know everything. Uh, the whole point of having a team in place is that because I don't know everything, I have the team to help me figure out the best solution. And I think that's how you build the credibility by appreciating what they do, acknowledging what they have done well, and at the same time involving the team in this whole process.
Are there any particular team building exercises that you do where you get people together? I don't know, for a company picnic or just meetings or anything that helps facilitate that introduction?
Yeah, so when I'm visiting my sites, every time I visit, I take them out for dinner. I think I do the informal way of talking to them, and things come out in the informal session than in the formal sessions in the office. And then you can also start building up more close rapport with the team. So I tend to do that every time I'm traveling. And then I also realized that when you're traveling, you plan this thing out, but the place you are based in, you don't plan it, and you miss out on that. So I have made conscious efforts that in the place where I'm based, that I do the same thing. That I have frequent evening out with the team to encourage them to get to know them better formally and informally.
Right. So that occurs. So the idea is getting out of the formal office environment, maybe a little less formal, and
Yeah, it could lead to we could do bowling, we could do just have dinner, drinks. It has multiple different shapes to it, but the point is to get out of the office environment and meet.
right. Yeah, makes sense. So you've done a number of different roles. A little bit different question is when you've come into these roles, there are a lot of reasons there is a role available. It might have been an antagonistic prior situation. It could be that somebody's moved on. How would you classify the roles that you step into, the reason that you've been hired?
Different companies, different reasons. Some case people moved on. Some case they wanted a transformational change. Some cases they wanted someone with more cross cultural experience to deal with cross cultural sensitivities in the business. So it has been various reasons why I joined different companies.
Uh, so, so that's interesting. Given what would you say in your background? Because I think that's really important, particularly, well, vitally important for international companies. In your background, that has kind of formed you to be able to manage these cross-cultural relationships.
This is the experience you gain, right? My most of my adult life initially was in US, and typically what happens is I'm originally from India, but my adult working life is mostly in US, at least initially. And what you would see is people who live in US, they stay in US, they don't get out of US, so they may have global roles, but they are physically still staying in US. In my career path, I made the switch in 2010 when I left US and moved to Singapore. Uh, and since then, I have been a global citizen, moving from Singapore to Zurich, from Zurich to Malaysia, Malaysia to Singapore, now to Netherlands here. So, with that kind of physical movements that we did, gives me the exposure how to deal with different cultures more effectively. There's a steep learning curve across every time you make such changes, not just for me, also for my family.
Yeah, I'm sure that has been a unique growing experience for them. My wife and I moved to Japan for a couple of years, and it's really interesting. You know, just the fact. So I grew up as in America, and but just the fact of living somewhere different actually gives you a different view of where you came from, which really helps, I think, to
It is very different than visiting places. When you start living, you appreciate the culture much more in depth.
definitely, definitely, and actually you can see how people think differently. I love Japan. And it really, the experience, we were there for 2.5 years, gave me some new insights into where I came from. So yeah, that really helps translate into the business environment. So, what do you see as the largest challenges in supply chain and operations leadership these days, and then particularly the job that you're facing now?
The challenges remain the same with some nuances now with the tariff complication that's coming in and the protectionism that's coming in from each of the country in the region. So that adds complexity to the operation, especially global supply chain. But beyond that geopolitical concern, I think the important part for operations as a whole is all about speed and flexibility. So at least the businesses I have been to and this current business I'm in today, it's all about speed and flexibility. How do you make sure your cycle times are compressed to the extent that you are building to order rather than building to forecast? How do you make sure your supply chain lead times are compressed so that you're ordering to order rather than to forecast? And having the supply reliability and leveraging that ecosystem that you have to build to make sure that you have a reliable operations.
Yeah. So, some thoughts on how you do that?
Yeah, that's easier said than done. So it starts with how do you do planning in the first place, and demand planning process, how you use your technology to drive that, how do you apply the AI and machine learning into your planning process. That's one aspect of it. When it comes to manufacturing, it's all about how do you make sure that you're taking all the waste out of your manufacturing processes. How do you align your cycle time, your capacity, your WIP management, your variability into this. So it's all about, so how do you automate your factories? How do you improve your first pass yield so that you're not doing so much of rework? How do you then ensure your supplier management, where your suppliers need to be and how many suppliers you can manage? The question comes, is the supplier quality of the standard you need? So how do you plan for all those kind of things? It's the end of the pipe metric is on time delivery and lead times, right? But to do that, all these things have to play a critical role and align themselves.
Yeah, boy, there is so much to unpack from that response. But I want to start with the planning, because it's one of the things that I've observed over my 35 years in operations is that planning is such a critical component, and a lot of times what we've seen happen at the Operations Science Institute is that people buy these very complex planning systems, and then the planners get treated kind of like third class citizens, and they're just all they're doing is feeding the beast, and it's crazy. It's kind of like, you hire somebody who's never driven a school bus before to take all the kids in the neighborhood to school, and it's kind of crazy. Talk about that for a little while.
No, you're absolutely right, Ed. I think, and that's not just true for planning, that's for any system technology implementation you talk about, right? So the first thing is really to understand what is you want out of the technology. What is your vision? Forget the system, forget everything else. If you have a clean whiteboard, how would you run your business? Assuming you have every technology at your disposal. So now you define your process around what you want, and then you see how that fits and the value it brings to you. And in that process, you're absolutely right that the talent plays an important role. How do you upskill the people to do the job that they need to do? So the idea of technology is not to replace those people. The idea of the technology is to make those people more effective so they can have more insight to make more strategic decisions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, you're singing my song, and the one of the themes we hit on over and over again with Operation Science is, if people don't understand the behavior of the systems, then the technology is just going to help them do bad things faster.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the MRPs, right? Same concept with the MRP. If the buyer is simply executing to the MRP recommendation, then I don't need a buyer. I can just automate that whole process. The reason I need a buyer is to check what MRP is doing. So you need to understand how MRP runs or how the attributes work together to give you what you want, and then help fine tune that process.
Yeah, exactly. And set the policies that you put into the system.
Absolutely. And that's one reason why, for example, in the buying organization, I don't know, in 1990s, 2000, 2010 as well, the buyers used to be high school graduates. Now, for me, I need the buyers who are supply chain graduate, who understand system much better.
Well, I will tell you that we have had great success with operations science, teaching it sort of in a different way to have people understand at whatever level they are. I mean, literally, we could work with somebody as long as they know how to add, multiply, supply, and divide. Getting people to understand those concepts can be something that really can accelerate their skill set. But and then that goes back to what you were talking about with reducing cycle times. How do you understand what your cycle time should be? And then you mentioned also, or what they could be, you mentioned also automation. Talk about how you look at the trade-off. So when you come into a new job, obviously one thing you can do is spend a ton of money and automate stuff, but that's not always the best thing to do. How do you make that evaluation and look at trade-offs?
So typically, when I go and visit, let's talk about factory automation. So if I limit to the factory to begin with, we can go to planning and we can go to warehouse and so on and so forth and procurement. But if you look at factory itself, what I typically find, Ed, is that the companies that do not have a proper strategic thinking on factory automation, they automate in bits and pieces. And when you automate something in bits and pieces, that doesn't give you the complete value that you need to get out of it. So the way I have approached factory automation is to look at the entire what kind of production lines we have and what are our metrics around that. Well, if you value stream map that whole production line, where are our bottlenecks? What's our first pass yield, right? So you have to have those understanding of different stations and to see how the output you're getting. Automation that I do, if I just focus on automation of one piece of that production line, what do I get out of it? At the end of the line, do I still get the same result or I get a different result? Usually I tend to automate the entire line to get the biggest bang for the money. Obviously prioritize those lines based on customer demand and many other factors that go with it otherwise.
Yeah, sometimes it can be a solution looking for a problem because, there are situations where it doesn't make sense to automate. And so,
Absolutely. That's the whole part. I've seen where you have an automation done for one part of the production line and the output of the production line is still the same.
yeah, 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 right.
So I spent a lot of money on that, and then comes a request for another capex to say, hey, how can we have a backup for that automation that you have done? Because if that automation fails, that station stops. So now you're doubling the cost of it, but nothing is changing as the output for you.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That reminds me of a story very early on in my career. We were working with a plant and they had installed a completely automated line. And the idea was to do one piece flow. And what they didn't realize was the way they had set the line up, anytime one part of the line went down, the whole line went down. And so what that speaks to from an operations science standpoint is you need some buffering of variability. And we went into the place and literally the second day we were there, we did some simple analysis and said, oh, it looks like us like you need more work in process. Well, and we didn't know what that meant. It just, the analysis showed us that. But then what we figured out was they needed to decouple parts of the line and just put whip buffers in between them. And they increased throughput 30%. So yeah, you have to be careful. It's like any kind of technology. You have to understand what you're trying to accomplish and the behavior of the operations.
Yeah, you need to know your production. You need to value stream map it to understand how they're all connected.
Yeah, exactly. So talk about a situation, and it doesn't have to be for automation, because I think when we worked with you at ABB, I think you did the same thing on inventory, but where you simplified an overly complex process to make some major impact.
Oh boy, yeah, I can give you a couple of examples of that, and the really simple ones, and these are not rocket science. It's just how you apply that, right? I'll give you an example. In my very early days of so ABB, I worked twice. When I was in India, and again my second stint in Zurich. And so when I used to be an engineer at that time, focusing on supply on the design of transmission distribution substations. So we had a customer in one city. We had the design center of ABB in another city. And the process was that the design guys will put some paper, that they'll design something on a piece of paper. They will courier it to the design team at the customer end. The customer guys will have a look at that. They will give their feedback, mark it on the piece of paper, courier it back to them. And then back and forth kept happening because they had differences in opinion how things are happening. That whole process took so much time before you could finalize a design to start implementing it. And you have penalties on these projects if you are delayed. These are 18 months projects with heavy penalties for delays and everything. So a simple approach there was, hey, look, I had by the time moved from design to sales in the city where the customer was based. And I told these guys, look, why don't I, I come from your department, you trust me. If you trust me, I'll just go to the customer site, which is right next door to where I'm sitting in my office, and I'll work with them, and all the minor corrections that need to be done on the drawing, I'll take care of it face to face with them. And that itself cut my lead time by 30%. A very simple thing like that. And avoided all the back and forth. The customer was very happy because I could talk to them face to face, explain ABB's viewpoint, understand their viewpoint, and come to a conclusion. So that's a very simple example of it. Another example I can give is, we had this case with my other company where we had sourcing was centralized, but our purchasing was decentralized. Every site we had buyers who were buying the same material from the same supplier.
Well, hold on. So let me just clarify that. So you said sourcing was centralized. So the contracts with the suppliers was centralized, but then each site had their buyers.
Correct. The materials management was done by each site. So now the supplier was complaining, hey, whenever there is a capacity constraint, he does not know how to prioritize shipment to which site.
Okay.
And usually what was happening is the site that was most vocal used to get the material, even if they're filling up safety stocks, right? While the other site needs it for a customer order. So it was not a question of cost, it was a question of material availability to meet customer demand.
Okay.
And the complication was that these sites were on different ERP systems.
Oh, okay.
So how do you make this work? Now, one answer is to say, hey, let's bring them all onto single ERP instance. Now that I would have retired by the time.
Yeah, that's the expensive option. Yeah.
So we came up with a solution. We built up a central system, advanced supply chain planning system. We connected that with the legacy ERP system of the site. And on that central system, then we had these global buyers. We positioned them in Singapore and in India. And we said, hey, for supplier, these are your single window contact.
Okay.
So single point of contact for you. And then these buyers were creating purchase orders for the different sites based on true demand requirement for each site and placing it to the supplier through this central system.
That's interesting. So did that mean that you didn't need the buyers at the sites anymore? How was that received?
Yeah, so that was a challenging part, right? So first thing was the general manager of the site saying, hey, you are taking control of my materials management
Right.
from me, and that is my bread and butter into my factory. That's my feeder into the factory. How will I run my factory based without that? So that was a challenge. So there's a change management process that we had to work through. We started small with a couple of sites with the general managers who were more willing and open to it.
Yeah.
Fail-safe arrangement that in case something goes wrong, the sites have still the control to manage it, and gradually build the trust that the system is working and more effective for you.
So how long did that migration take?
So when we started with a pilot, and it's important to how you pick a pilot to Ed. Sometimes you pick pilots which are small and which do not move the needle and doesn't the excitement. So you don't want to fall into that trap. At the same time, you don't want a pilot that is so complex that it fails. So somewhere in the middle, we pick the right pilot with the right sites where we could move the needle but still manage the complexity of the pilot. So the pilot took us almost. So I started the pre-work and change management on it 6-7 months before even we started planning the pilot. So it was all bringing stakeholders on up to speed, talking to them, understanding it, and the whole change management that goes with it. So after 6 months of homework that was done, then we started into the pilot, and that pilot took 9 months after that. And then after was the roll up of other sites.
Okay. And then, so the total thing, it sounds like it took a couple of years.
3 years, 2 3 years, and you want to do that because you have to make sure that the stakeholders are comfortable with it, and the risk is managed for the business.
Yeah, you touch on change management, which is such an important technique to manage or to master, particularly in your role. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, what are some of the things? I think you've touched on a lot of them with that example. But what are some of the things when you consider when you're trying to implement a change?
First thing I consider is, why am I doing a change?
That's a good question. Yes.
What is the business problem I'm trying to solve? And I always tell my team that you should not be doing more than a few strategic projects a year. Do not have a laundry list of projects, initiatives, and get distracted if it's not moving the needle. Kill that long tail of projects and then reorient those resources to something big that you want to do, which are game changers.
Right. That's WIP management.
It absolutely absolutely is. Otherwise, what happens anytime you come with a new project, they say we need more resources. The resources are there. How do you reorganize it is the question. So to answer your question, there, the first thing is, what is the business problem I'm trying to solve? Is the problem big enough that the leadership team is losing sleep on it? So if you have identified that business problem, then I think if you come up with a solution to that problem, everyone will jump onto it to say, hey, yes, we will support you because I'm solving their problem.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't be additional work that they now have to do, right?
Absolutely. And if I'm not solving their business problem, then I actually have a wrong idea in my mind to begin with. Right. So once that alignment is there, then it's comparatively easier to get the focus to drive it. Then the second step comes as, do I have the right structure set up for it? Have we put the right our A team to work on that initiative? And that is also a painful process because you have to pull people from the day-to-day job who are really good, who knows the stuff, who know the process, who know the company, who know the product, pull them into the strategic project full time. And how do you reorganize around that?
So that's interesting. Quick pause here, and I want to jump in on that because early on in my career, that same thing happened where they were putting together, they were rationalizing supply base. They literally took people out of their roles and put them into what we call corporate commodity teams. So it sounds like to me you're saying that's I don't know if you do it every time, but it's a central technique that you would use is to establish a team that actually takes people out of what they're doing day to day, but they're concerned with this problem, to work on that problem, and then how do you reassure them that their old job or a new job will be there when they're done?
Well, actually, the idea is that if they do this well, they should get promoted.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. That's a big carrot. Yeah.
It's a career motivation factor for them because if a project is so strategically important and you have been picked up for that role, I think that's a great feather on the cap for you.
Okay. All right. So what to do, and then the structure. Anything else on change management?
Communication, right? Mapping the right stakeholders and having communication governance process in place is important. Managing expectation is important. In fact, I see that to be the most important part of change management.
Managing expectation.
Managing expectation, because if you have managed the expectation, then how you perform makes a difference. I've seen many times, I've learned as part of my career path too, you may do very well, but if the expectation was that you would do better than that, that doesn't play well from your career perspective. And if the expectation is well managed and you do at that par or better, uh, then you're in a better shape.
That's very interesting. So a little bit more detail on that. When you say expectation, the expectation is the results of the change you're going through, uh, the expectation of how their roles might evolve or change, or
It's a combination of many things, right? The result is one, the complexity is one of what you're dealing with, the risks that's involved with that. It should not be, we should not present a rosy picture all the way through. Uh, Make sure the red flags are brought up upfront, honestly and openly discussed as a team and communicated. So managing that expectation on reality of what's happening and what results we can expect out of it, and trying to deliver that or better, you'll be in a much better position than underperforming.
Okay. Wow, that's a great summary. So for change management, you're looking at the why, or you're doing what you're going to be doing. You're looking at the structure in terms of how you get people involved, and you're looking at setting expectations appropriately so that people know what's coming.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit. I know we've worked on operations science, and it's been maybe a while, but I'd be interested to see how you see that in terms of understanding flow, variability, and capacity, and making a difference in execution.
Yeah, you know what sometimes it's intuitive. People think, and it's not as intuitive as people might think it is. Um, People think adding inventory means improving your cycle time and improving your on-time delivery. And in my experience, is actually quite opposite to that. Yes, if you're adding a bit of inventory to manage to buffer your variations, it will improve your cycle time, your lead time. But the moment you start adding more WIP beyond the optimal range, it actually makes your cycle time worse, creates a congestion, the delays that happens. And what happens is when you keep adding this buffer to manage that, you're missing all the rocks underneath problems that are there that you need to fix to begin. So I always say the reduced cycle time, better on-time delivery means better inventory turns.
Right. Yeah, there definitely is an optimal. And a lot of times, one of the things we've seen is people just don't even understand the relationship. I mean, you can see, we do pretty simple surveys where you see that people, for instance, don't understand the relationship between, efficiency or utilization and cycle time. Some people think the more efficient I am, the higher utilized I am. That means shorter cycle times. Other
Oh,
people,
no, that is Bob. I'll be surprised if operations people are saying that, Ed, if your utilization is close to 95%, your cycle time will just explode.
well, that's interesting because you would be surprised. We have done this. It's a simple test that we've done where you just ask them to draw the relationship, and it ends up looking like a spaghetti diagram. But that's a discussion for another podcast. Let's switch and talk about a huge topic today, which is artificial intelligence. Uh, what do you see in terms of opportunities and challenges for AI and operations in your roles?
So AI, again, is a pretty broad topic, and again, it comes back to how you apply that to your particular business problem you're trying to solve, right? So, for example, if you're I was in a plastic packaging company. So there, in that business, we were making all of these bottles for the dairy customers of ours. Now, now when they do that, they have the milk production of the cow is the important demand consideration of how bottle consumption will happen. And the milk production of the cow depends on many factors, including weather, rain, da da da, so many other things, right? So how do you put up a system where you can predict from a weather perspective how things are happening, and based on that prediction to say, hey, on this particular day, my demand will shoot up. This particular day, my demand may go down. So you can apply AI, web crawling, and all the other outside indicators, put them into the system, and come up with a more effective planning process.
That's fascinating. I didn't think we were going to be getting into milking cows, but
There you go. I said I've worked in 5 different industries. That was one of those.
um, so what else about AI? You see widespread adoption, or is it kind of feel everybody? It seems to me it's the Wild West these days. Anybody can say they're an AI consultant, and you don't know what you're getting.
It is, and I think it's being used quite generously everywhere, without really understanding what you want to get out of it. And I think it's become more of a hype than. So AI definitely has a lot of value, right? So the question is, again, what exactly you want to get out of it. So for me, when I talk about AI application, another good example for me, AI application would be is in my testing, for example, what we do, right? We have a testing process that takes a long time, and there's a lot of automation that requires tweaking in that process. Can we put up a system that is machine learning based, AI based, to do that automation for me, the testing automation for me? If I can do that, I can cut down my cycle time by half. So if it takes me 7 months to do testing, can I bring it down to 3 months using the AI methodology?
Now, you are that's something you're considering that you've already done.
This is what we are considering, we are actually halfway through it.
Okay, I got it. Okay, yeah,
The AI applications have to be very clearly thought through to where it benefits you.
right. Yeah, you can't just go to Chat GPT and say, solve my profitability problems, right? It's got to.
You have to apply your common sense in where you want to apply it. And again, comes back to are you with that AI application, are you moving the needle?
Right. Yeah, yeah. And in terms of where you get your AI expertise, I mean, are you going out and looking at consulting firms? Are you developing it internally, or
So in our case, it's a mix of both. But I think the internal is important because a product is you need to have the knowledge of the product to do that kind of a job. So so having that internal expertise really helps.
so? It's that then? That would be. It sounds like one of those change management efforts where you have to identify the why, the structure, and the expectations. Same.
Absolutely. The playbook remains the same. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. For me, one of the things that has always where I've thought about AI would make sense is getting rid of the bullwhip effect in the supply chain, because what happens is anytime you put a planner, uh, and not that planners are trying to do this, but it's just the nature of the mechanics in a decision loop, they just start making decisions and accumulating. And what AI I think could really help with is looking at the overall performance, much like you talked about with the planning in the other example you provided earlier, where you were consolidating planner at a larger level. It could be very effective with that because you kind of take it out of people trying to optimize locally.
Absolutely. An example, Ed, I can give you is of the IoT, right? So take an example of a power transformer that's in a power plant or or in distribution. Such an important part of your transmission. If that power transformer fails, the electricity boards, the companies can lose a lot of money, and also it's convenience to the customers. So how can you be having a predictive maintenance process for those transformers? Now those transformers are spread across the city, outside the city in far locations. So how do you manage it? And in the power transformer, the one of the important aspects is the insulation that we have inside it. And if you put an IoT, a simple tracker sensor on each of those transformers, which in a control room you can sense how the strength of the insulation material is, and if it's your rating, that sends a signal to someone to go and fix it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to figure out the applications of it. So that has a huge impact on profitability of the company and also customer satisfaction. And the solution is not complicated. It's setting up a quality sensor in the transformer.
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely, because, AI never sleeps. And so, you don't have to worry about holidays and weekends and that sort of stuff. Yeah. It can be.
Then it sends an alarm signal to someone to go fix it when it gets to that stage before it gets to being shut down.
Yep. Yep. Oh, those are great examples. Okay. So let's, a little bit different. Looking back on your career, is there a favorite mistake or learning experience that has shaped your leadership approach, or a couple of them?
Managing expectation is one of them. I learned a good way too there. After performing well, if the expectations are not well managed, it'll be still seen underperformance. So I think that's critical for me. The second one for me is also as part of the career path is making sure you take people along with you. Operations, supply chain, this is a job where you have to take people along with you.
Elaborate on that a little bit. What you mean by taking them along with you?
You can always come up with a beautiful strategy, a beautiful vision of what you want to do. If the people who have to execute that are not bought into it, then you will see that they'll from a change management perspective, they will be passive aggressive, right? They'll not say no to your face, obviously. That's how it is. But they will try to slowball you with different other aspects and create hurdles here and there, right? So for me, as part of the lesson learning is manage expectation, take people along with you. More importantly, if you bring them along in the solution making process, you have already bought them into that.
Right, right. Okay. Anything else? What about managing up when you're managing with your bosses? You're usually at pretty high levels, so we're talking like at C levels. But any lessons there?
So yeah, I think important is to share your vision of where you want to go, and the vision needs to be exciting. It cannot be boring tactical thing, right? It needs to be telling them what you are doing as a vision, how that will transform the company, and the transformation has to come back into the shape that the C-suite understand, right? Business growth, margin, cash management, customer satisfaction, right? We shouldn't be talking about missing part number here and there, truck shipment missed. That's not, and operation supply chain is so fundamental to any business that it really is driving the comparative advantage in the market. So how do you present your vision in the C-suite that is so appealing that they feel that there's nothing they can do without
Yeah. Well, there's not much they can do without operations for any length of time. Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I've seen this before, and I actually had our first guest on the podcast, Mike McBride, has mentioned this. That when new executives come in, to your point, you can't say, "Well, we're going to do exactly what we used to do because it was working pretty well. We just need some tweaks," right? And so you have to kind of balance because you do want to bring in new ideas and you do want to make a compelling story, but the people down in the trenches, they're like, okay, it's the same thing we were working on yesterday, and now it's called something else. How do you balance that?
There are few things that, anytime you go, there are always things that are some good initiatives that are going on in the company, and some that may not be or gap might be there. So I think it's very important to acknowledge the good initiatives that are going on. Then in that case, first you are accepting the fact that it's a fantastic thing that you guys are working on, appreciating that, and then supporting that wholeheartedly, right? And then you have places where the gaps are coming, and you say, hey, this is where we need to plug with more new ideas, new thoughts, and then they start thinking about it. Because what happens is when you go and start trashing the existing initiative and come up with your new initiative, it will never fly. And also, it's not the right thing to do because there are always some good things, some bad things happening, right? So, on the good things, support, execute even better. I think you'll build the credibility very fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you do have to make a story of it. I mean, that's one of the things we talk about in our online courses. What is your leadership story? It's not enough to come in and just say, well, we're going to have better inventory accuracy and we're going to better quality. You kind of have to engage people with the
I'll
story.
give you an example, right? In my business, if I reduce my cycle time by half, huge business impact, right? So it's not that the people don't know it, people know it, right? So now how do you execute to that? And if you're able to execute to that, the impact is clearly seen. So that's what you have to do is to come up and say, what should I do to have a huge business impact? And then how do I execute it and create that vision?
Yes, indeed. And so it's So everybody knows cycle time reduction will help you out, right? And so then the compelling story comes in. Okay, well, we've been struggling with reducing our cycle time for a long time. Here's some new ideas maybe for how we're going to approach that.
Yeah, Ed, so there could be new ideas. There could also be some ideas may have been good, but not properly executed, not properly structured, thought. Um, and also that probably the mix was not right between the long-term actions and short-term actions. People were losing trust in whether things are moving in the right direction, right? So how do you first structure yourself for success? So that clearly will show the difference in how you're executing to it. And then what will come is what are new thoughts that are coming into the place, and what are you doing now in this year to make the impact? Yeah, you may have a long-term perspective in mind, but that doesn't solve my current day problem. So breaking it down and showing the output of that in a quarter or within the year, that's where the difference comes.
Fascinating. Yeah, great insight. So let's switch gears a little bit. We got a few minutes left and talk about Rahul, the young man, even the young boy. You mentioned you grew up in India. What was your early family life like? You have brothers and sisters? Are you the oldest, the youngest?
I'm the youngest. I have a brother. He's a couple of years older than I am, and my adult life, as I said, I moved around quite a bit. My young life was also the same. I changed 10 schools by the time I finished my grade 12, so, and there were different cities.
What drove that?
Oh, that I was a youngster with my parents. My parents moved. He was in a transferable government job, so he moved, and I moved with him.
Okay. All right. Wow. So how do you think then that affected your outlook on the work that you do now?
It did because it made me realize how I need to adapt to new culture, to new friends, new environment. Made me very comfortable to change. So now, and because of that, I'm so comfortable with change management and challenging status quo. I think it all started off early in my life.
Yeah, that's interesting. Parents can be, I think, overly protective in that regard because, oh, we don't want to move, we don't want to change. But actually, it seems tough at the time because I remember we moved with our kids and they were in school. We had to change schools and they just thought the world was ending. But I think, in the long run, it really gives them that experience to see that it's not going to be the end of the world, and
It is not that. And when I left US, so a lot of people said, "Why are you leaving US?" People come to US and they stay in US lifelong, right? They don't leave after that. And I actually had to give my green card so I could maintain it. Look, my purpose of coming to US was to build my career and gain experience. And now I have gained that experience. Now I have a bigger challenge that I'm finding in another occasional job. Why shouldn't I take that? It just expands to what I initially intended to do, gain even more experience, take more risk in life, and enjoy my growth in that fashion.
right. Yeah, a lot of times people approach risk fearfully, right? But and they overlook the growth opportunities because there's plenty to be had when taking on new challenges.
Higher the risk, higher the reward. I could have played safe and stayed in the US.
Yeah, well, you've done very well. So, were there any early mentors where your parents talk about the influence of your parents or other folks in your early life as a child?
My parents definitely were. I mean, clearly they were moving around, so they were comfortable with change. And that made me realize if they can be and they can make friends and so quickly going to a new place, I should learn how they do that. How do they connect? How do they establish connections and stuff like that? So that really helped. So now my son is like that too because he has moved around so much that he is quite social and very quick to make friends.
I bet he's pretty adaptable.
Yes, and culturally sensitive because he has lived in so many countries.
Yeah, that's a great point. Back to that early discussion we said about giving you the different viewpoints. So along those lines, you're moving a lot. Like you mentioned, when you come to a new job, there's a lot of travel that takes you away from your family. How do you balance that work? How do you maintain that work-life balance in your career?
Yeah, so this is something I always tell my team, my colleagues, and everyone else. Um, you can only work X number of hours a day productively. So if you are working too late in the night, that means either you're not being productive and smart in what you do, or you have too much on your plate. You need more people in your organization, right? So it has to be either of the two. So I usually don't take work home. It is very rare that you will see me taking work at home. And when I'm in the office, I'm productive. I get my work done so I can spend quality time with my family.
So what does a typical day look like for you then?
My typical day is I'm in the office around 8:30, 9, and I'm done by 7. So 7, 7:15 in that range. And then I'm with the family. After that, go for my workout or play or swim, whatever I need to do, and then the weekends I'm really focused on my family.
Okay. All right. That sounds yeah, that's important for people to maintain that balance. It's interesting. We worked with a hospital. They were working on patient flow time in the hospital, and like the head nurse said, "Oh, we keep this place running. I can see what's going on from my house on Saturday nights at midnight." And I'm thinking to myself exactly what you said. I'm like, I greatly that's wonderful, your commitment, but it speaks to another problem, that
Big time, and at some point you'll get burnt out. Happy family, productive employee. So you got to balance it out and spend time with the family. You don't want to regret later in your life that you just kept working and didn't spend time with your closed ones.
yeah, I call that giving it, a question, the deathbed test. If I'm laying on my deathbed, am I really going to think, boy, I just wish I'd worked more overtime, on project. Yeah, it's an important consideration.
And I think in my company and other companies I worked for, they have been always very considerate about it. As long as you get the work done, and the work done is to work smart. As I said, focus on few critical things. Don't focus on. I don't take more than 3, 4 initiatives in a year, and I tell my team, I don't want you to take either. So if you are burning midnight oil, I'm not asking you to do. That'll be you if you do that.
Yeah, I mean, every now and then it happens. That's a capacity buffer, right? But
Once in a while is okay. The exception is okay. It can't be a norm.
yeah, it should be the exception and not the rule. And that, actually, that's the whole another thing. If you look at the Operations Science Institute website, the whole idea is for people to understand the science so they at least don't create self-inflicted stress. Because when people are making decisions, like some people, like I said, we've seen it where people think, oh, if I'm more efficient and I'm working more, things happen more quickly. It just is self-inflicted stress, and that's
It is. You will be surprised how many projects run in an organization, and without realizing how it's conflicting in resources. And we kill ourselves doing that many projects, and most of those projects, 90% of those, are not even something that the top manager is seeing them as strategic.
right. Yeah. It got started, somebody wanted to do it, and it kind of acquired a life of its own.
Yeah, yeah. So I love the word kill those projects.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, so it's important to get rid of the things that aren't really, or just sucking out productivity rather than actually contributing. Yeah. So then what in your early life led you to become an operations and supply chain person? Was there something when you were a young man that led you to this?
Yes, I think it did, Ed. But so I'm an electrical engineer. That's my foundational education. And I joined a design organization with ABB, so designing all this nice power systems and stuff like that, right? So that was exciting for me because what I learned is what I was applying in real life. And then I did that for a year and a half, and then I moved into sales. And the reason those guys moved into sales was they said, "Hey, look, we have salespeople who are also engineers, but they have been in sales for too long, and now we are still selling on price rather than on the technical benefit of our product. So how do we do that?" So I got into sales, and from sales, that I got into project management. So my first 4 years of my career, I was exposed to various different functions in the business. And then I realized how important it is to understand how these different functions hand off from each other and how they're connected and linked. And that was my early stage of getting my interest into operations supply chain, because at the end of the day, operations supply chain is dealing with every single business function you can think of and aligning them.
Yeah, it's the mechanics of how the world works.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that the CEOs of new companies will come from operations and supply chains because they appreciate and understand the holistic business better.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Well, listen, Rahul, it's been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it, learned a lot, and gained a lot of insight. And I appreciate your participation in the podcast and hope to be continuing our conversation in the future.
It has been a pleasure, Ed. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
The Operations Science podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. Join the Operations Science Institute at opscience.org. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not represent their company's views unless specifically stated as such.